Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode on Swish City, where we're going to be looking at this blockbuster trade that was alarming yesterday for all NBA fans as the Minnesota Timberwolves and New York Knicks came together to get in a blockbuster deal. And we're going to be breaking down all of the details, going in why did Minnesota make this move, why did New York make this move? How it works out for both teams, and overall, who is the winner? There's a little switch up from the power rankings. We'll have one of those coming out later today as well. Without further ado, let's get in the video at hand. So, like I was discussing in the introduction, as we all know, unless you're living under a rock, yesterday Shams came out of nowhere and dropped a bombshell of a trade announcing that the New York Knicks and Minnesota Timberwolves were getting involved in a deal, swapping out both of these star players alongside Dante DiVincenzo. If we want to look at the report, we have it here from Shams Charania. The Knicks have acquired Karl Anthony Towns from the Minnesota Timberwolves for Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo, and a first round pick via Detroit. Now, before you get all hyped up thinking, oh wow, that first round pick could be something crazy, it has a bunch of protections on it, and the pick most likely will convey as a second round pick for the Timberwolves in the future, unless the Pistons can jumpstart that rebuild by 25 or by 2027 and be legitimate forces in the Eastern Conference. When you look at this trade, both teams, I think, seemingly win at some aspect, even though it might not be the perfect trade for both teams. Now, as you guys may know, this trade cannot officially happen due to the fact with the CBA and the new rules constructed with the Timberwolves being a second apron team, they cannot take in more salary than they are sending out. So there's going to have to be a third team that is involved to make the money work. And that team has been said to be the Charlotte Hornets. Now, the Knicks are apparently sending salary, including Daquan draft trees and draft compensation, to Charlotte to get this deal done because New York is over the cap limit bringing in Towns. They have to shave off around $8 million in cap space. And if you look at their roster, you would think that the only player they could be able to trade would maybe be Miles McBride, maybe look to move off a player in Mitchell Robinson, but both players are said to be staying in New York. So with them going out and doing a sign and trade with Daquan Jeffries, maybe looking at another player on their team as well and moving out a player in Keita Bates Diop. I can see him being moved out in this deal going to Charlotte, with Charlotte taking on some draft compensation to ultimately make the trade work. Now, we don't know the true specifics with Charlotte, what they're sending out, what they're bringing back in. So we'll have that updated for you guys, obviously, once that news is broken down. But Charlotte will be getting involved in this deal. So let's get in kind of a little bit of a breakdown of this deal, kind of looking at the players and what they're going to bring to each respective team. Starting off with the New York Knicks, they obviously went out and acquired center Karl Anthony Towns. Now, the Knicks entering this season already had made some big flashes and splashes by bringing in Mikal Bridges from Brooklyn over in a trade and also re signing OG Anunoby to a long term extension, the player that they traded for last trade deadline and during the regular season to make a playoff push. This ultimately led the Knicks into a confusing lineup. Obviously, with the Villanova boys being able to play once again, it was going to be some fun runs. With Mitchell Robinson being that starting center and entering the season with some injury concerns, it looked and seemingly seemed like Julius Randle was going to have to play that small ball five. And personally, I was not a big fan of that. I didn't think it necessarily was going to work for the Knicks. And with Julius also possibly entering the season in some injury riddled territory, the Knicks saw the writing on the wall with no backup center, losing Isaiah Hartenstein in free agency to the Thunder, not having Mitchell Robinson, probably not having Julius Randle for the start of the season. You're going to be putting all your eggs in one basket in Jericho Sims, who's a player who hasn't been able to prove himself as a backup center or even starting center in the league as a young raw talent. Therefore, the Knicks were fielding for offers trying to find a center. They had called some other teams as well, trying to see if they would be interested in Julius Randle. Some of those teams being the likes of Atlanta, Miami, but neither of those teams were willing to bite on Julius. Minnesota was willing to bite on that type of deal, as they also were willing to take on Dante DiVincenzo, but we'll get into that in a little bit. For the Knicks, they bring in obviously one of the best shooting bigs in NBA history at the center position in Karl Anthony Towns. His offensive spacing is going to be absolutely fantastic. A fantastic tier two player to put alongside Jalen Brunson, especially with that pick and roll, pick and pop is going to be fantastic. The spacing is going to work out. They also have those fantastic wings in Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby to run at the 2-3 position. If they want to run big lineups with Mitchell Robinson once he's back, you could run Cat at the 4, similarly how they did with Gobert in Minnesota. If you want to run Cat at the 5 and run Josh Hart in those lineups with Jalen Brunson, having him being a small ball 4 and grabbing some rebounds, you can do it. If you want to have Anunoby or Bridges play the 4, you can have that. The lineups and versatility with this Knicks team is endless with adding Karl Anthony Towns, and it is definitely going to make them a legitimate threat in the Eastern Conference. Now, when talking about this Minnesota Timberwolves team, they went out and acquired players in Julius Randle and went out and acquired players in Dante DiVincenzo. Talking about Julius first, Julius obviously being an all-star selection the last couple of seasons, was the face of New York, kind of got them out of that slump and dry spell, bringing basketball to the Mecca once again and putting a face on that franchise. He did a fantastic job doing so. He never was that star player that could take over for the Knicks, in my opinion, and definitely playing at that small ball 5. I don't necessarily know if he would have fit with this team in the direction they were going. Similar to a Celtics team moving on from Marcus Smart, Grant Williams, Robert Williams last season. The Knicks see the writing on the wall. Their championship hope is here, and they need to capitalize on that opportunity. With no center, to start off the season with Julius kind of entering, maybe being small ball 5, not really working out, capitalizing and getting a guy that you were linked for the past couple seasons in Karl Anthony Towns is a good move. Towns also has played with Tom Thibodeau, and we all know that Julius Randle also played with Chris Finch in New Orleans. Randle's going to be adding as that 4, playing alongside Gobert, Jaden McDaniels, and could still be an offensive threat, helping out on the inside. The only problem that I see kind of here with this team is the spacing down low in the front court. Randle alongside Gobert isn't going to be that great, but defensively, it might not be as great as well. But I still think they'll be pretty solid as a front court pairing. Maybe a move with Randle could be seen in the future. Now, when talking about the other player they acquired and talking about Dante DiVincenzo, this is a player that they had their eyes on. Dante DiVincenzo, obviously, last year with the Knicks, played a big role with them having some injuries in the playoffs, getting the most threes in Knicks history and putting on a face for the Knicks, playing 30 minutes per game, getting that big role with this team. And before he signed with New York last season in free agency, Minnesota were one of the teams that were interested in him. So they were definitely looking at him as a piece to acquire if they were to move off of Karl Anthony Towns. I think this is a smart acquisition for the Wolves. DiVincenzo can be that additional scorer that you kind of lacked last season, besides Anthony Edwards and Conley in that guard room. And he seemingly can fit in as a starter or off the bench, depending on the lineups you want to run with this team. So speaking of lineups, speaking at depth charts and breaking things down, we're now going to look at both of these rosters and kind of analyze how they're going to build and how they're going to work going into this season. First, we have the New York Knicks. And the Knicks here, like I said, are going to have a top tier starting 5 going to the likes of the other competitors in the Eastern Conference and NBA champions of Boston. Their lineup most likely to start this season will be Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, and Karl Anthony Towns, with having guys off the bench in Precious Achiuwa, Deuce McBride, Cameron Payne, Tyler Kolek, and Mitchell Robinson. This kind of screams to me that players like Landry Shamet and Marcus Morris might get those opportunities on those Exhibit 9 and Exhibit 10 day deals to finish out and fill out those final roster spots on veteran minimum contracts. because this team will be hard capped at the second apron. They'll be able to bring in those guys, have them be legitimate bench scorers, and help out fill out that depth that they seemingly did lose in that shooting from DiVincenzo at that guard position. A player that's really going to have to step up and show out for this team is going to have to be Miles McBride. Last season was a player that was a pretty good bench scorer for them, but was not required to be that bench scorer for them every single night. This season, he is that six man. He is that spark plug. He is that high energy scoring off the bench that this team is going to require to be an effective playoff and regular season team. And he's going to have to deliver on that. I don't fear that he won't be able to do that. I think he'll be able to hit that mark. But I just saying that's something that we're gonna have to see as well. Tyler Kolek might get some more run as well, playing some guard minutes. And we'll get to see the likes of Precious Achua getting a big part of those minutes, especially with Mitch Robinson out at that backup center or power forward position. Now, again, when diving in and now looking at the Timberwolves, I think their lineups could look a lot different. And there's a lot of speculation and breaking down with this lineup here. Now, obviously, I think that the key starting lineup, the one that you're probably going to run at the start of the season, is most likely Mike Conley, Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, Julius Randle, and Rudy Gobert. Now, that would seemingly replace, obviously, Gobert with, or not, excuse me, Cat with Julius Randle, but it allows Dante DiVincenzo to be that scoring plug off the bench alongside young players in Rob Dillingham, Naz Reid, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Joe Ingles, Terrence Shannon Jr., and Leonard Miller. Now, also, there's speculation that player like Naz Reid could insert himself into the starting lineup to get some of that scoring and shooting. Also, maybe some of these late game lineups, Dante DiVincenzo inserts himself into that starting lineup, sliding Anthony Edwards to the 3 and Jaden McDaniels to the 4, along adding Julius Randle to come off the bench to play alongside Naz Reid with some lineups. Ultimately, I think that one player that we're going to see an insurgence in big playing time from is Leonard Miller. He is that power forward slash small forward off the bench alongside Joe Ingles for this Minnesota Timberwolves team, excuse me. But I believe that he is going to have a high impact, be a high impact defender and rebounder for this bench unit. Specifically, if Randle is not coming off the bench as well, Randle is starting. There is a little bit of a hole at that power forward center position, regardless of what Nas plays. Nas is more comfortable at that 5. So Leonard Miller playing that 4, there will be a little bit of a hole. If you have Joe Ingles, you have Terrence Shannon, you have just Dillingham and Dante DiVincenzo, it's all scores, and Nas Reid with Nickeil Alexander-Walker being a flurry in there, you're going to need some extra rebounding, extra defense, and I think a guy like Leonard Miller is going to be tapped in and getting some of those minutes. I think that this Timberwolves team is going to be experimenting, having fun, really trying out different things, and I'm really inquired to see what they do with this team. As we all know, and if you don't know, the Timberwolves ultimately were going to have to make a move on Karl-Anthony Towns in the future. Players like Rudy Gobert were up for a contract extension next season, and guys like Naz Reid were extension eligible. Therefore, they weren't going to be able to keep this big 3 always together, and with Karl-Anthony Towns making the most money, getting a max contract at $220 million for the next 4 years, he was the one that basically had the writing on the wall for the team. Regardless if he didn't want to leave, regardless if he wanted to stay, it was over for Karl-Anthony Towns. Maybe not necessarily this season. Could have been one more season to test it out and really see what they had. But ultimately, they felt like they had to move on at this moment. For the Knicks, they had been looking in that center market, looking at players like Isaiah Stewart, Clint Capella, some of those smaller end centers, but no really deal had been materialized with that market. Not necessarily wanting to buy in Mitchell Robinson, not really wanting to buy in on a player in Julius Randle. So they ultimately went into the direction of calling up the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, Dante DiVincenzo also voiced some concern, voiced some complaints with the New York Knicks, as even though they were bringing all the Nova boys back together, they were going to have a fun experiment running with this team. He did not want his role being taken from him. He did not want to be that 6 man. He didn't want to have his role that he worked so hard for to get with the New York Knicks and expressed with the Knicks franchise that he felt he deserved being stripped away from him from one of his teammates. So ultimately, there was some discomfort there. He would have requested a trade behind the scenes, seemingly anyways. So the writing was kind of on the wall for him. So the Knicks move off a player in Randall who they didn't seemingly think fit in with their new direction, and DiVincenzo, who they felt like they had some other scoring already and was already going to ask out for a piece that they needed in the center position, with Randall kind of being hurt, with Robinson being hurt, with Hartenstein not being there, in Karl Anthony Towns, who also adds elements of both offense and defense. For the Timberwolves, they went out and got a player in Randall who they still think can work seemingly alongside on the offensive and defensive side of the ball as a fit next to Gobert, and got some additional shooting and scoring in Dante DiVincenzo. I think DiVincenzo ultimately is going to be that six-man type scoring mixed type for this team, and we're really going to have to see what this Timberwolves team looks like, because I think they can run a bunch of different lineups, and it's going to be very interesting to see who gets that run. Like I said, media days on Monday, training camps starting soon, so perfect time to have this trade. Hopefully, some more trades and some more breakdowns can happen before the start of the season, but we don't know. I don't know where trade happened yesterday. Absolutely crazy, but it's also fun to break down. Like I said, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I know the breakdown was a little bit later. I wanted to see if everything can materialize, everything can get through. Fortunately, we still don't know everything about the Charlotte half of the deal. So once I find that out, I'll update you guys. But once again, I appreciate you guys' support. Everybody tuning in on the revitalization of the channel. If you do enjoy the content, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, stay tuned. Like I said, we're going to have a power rankings video coming out right after this. So make sure to stay up to date for that. We're not slowing down on those for you guys. And we also will be having NBA content coming throughout the season. Follow me on Twitter as well at Bruce Velez to get all the updates on all my NBA stuff. Appreciate you all. Have a great rest of your day. Peace out.